They said I was dead, but I came back. I'd heard that line countless times on the internet. Maybe you have too. Those headlines like, "Man wakes up at his own funeral," or "Woman declared dead revives after doctor's pronouncement." Most of the time, I'd scroll past, chuckle dryly, and think, clickbait, nothing more, until it happened, just a few blocks from my home. A 74-year-old man was declared dead at a nursing home in Florida. His body was taken to a funeral home, and 3 hours later, as the staff was preparing the body, he sat up, alive, breathing, and completely confused. In that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear but from the realization that maybe we know far less than we think. About death, about the line between life and whatever comes after. My name is Josh Miller. I'm 41 years old, a freelance journalist obsessed with uncovering the strange but true. And this time, I decided to take on the strangest journey of my career to find out whether people really can come back from the dead, or whether it's all just medical error, false assumptions, or something science can't yet explain. I thought back to the first time I ever saw death up close. I was 12. It was a winter morning in Chicago. Snow was falling gently. We got the call that my grandfather, a former Marine from World War II, had passed away in his sleep. I still remember the feeling when I walked into the room where he lay. Still, quiet, too quiet. The silence made me shiver. My mom cried. My dad tried to stay strong, but his eyes were red. And I just stood there, staring at my grandfather, thinking, why isn't he breathing? Is that it? Just not breathing anymore? That was the first time I understood, or thought I understood, what death meant. A body that stops working. A soul that leaves. The end. But now, hearing stories like the woman in Venezuela who woke up inside her own coffin, or the young man in Ohio declared clinically dead, only to wake up 45 minutes later, I started to wonder, is death really an absolute line? Or is it a gray zone, something modern medicine still can't fully define? I dove into news reports, case studies, and medical records, and what shocked me wasn't one or two bizarre cases, it was hundreds. The first story that stopped me cold was from Detroit, Michigan in 2020. The Times reported on a 20-year-old woman, Timesha Beecham, who was declared dead at home after emergency workers failed to detect signs of life. Her grieving family signed the death certificate. She was taken to the funeral home, but as staff began preparing her body, she moved. She was breathing. Her eyes opened. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, frozen. How could something like that even happen? And it wasn't just her. In South Africa, a man was pronounced dead after a car accident and placed in a morgue freezer. 21 hours later, he woke up and started banging on the steel door, sending staff into a full-blown panic. In Ohio, back in 2014, a man named Tony Yall, just 37, was declared clinically dead after his heart stopped beating for 45 minutes. As his wife and son were saying their final goodbyes, his heart suddenly started beating again. He woke up hours later, healthy, talking as if nothing had happened. He said, "I don't remember where I went, just that it was dark, then light, and someone was calling my name." That's when I started feeling uneasy. How could modern medicine, with all its ECGs, brain scans, and high-tech monitoring, miss something this big? Or maybe some things still lie beyond the reach of machines? I started calling medical examiners. I spoke with a forensic investigator in Philadelphia who said, sometimes the human body enters an ultra-weak state, heart rate and breathing almost undetectable, especially with hypothermia or shock. But it's rare, extremely rare. I didn't know how rare really was, but I knew one thing: if it happened once, it could happen again. And that made it worth investigating. One Tuesday evening, while I was sorting through my list of these strange resurrections, my phone buzzed. It was an email, no subject line, no long intro, just one chilling sentence. I died in 2006, and I remember every second of it. Goosebumps. In journalism, you learn to tell the difference between hoaxes and genuine calls for attention. And something about this felt real. The email was from Rebecca Nolan, a woman living in Flagstaff, Arizona. She had been declared clinically dead after a severe allergic reaction to anesthesia during a routine dental procedure. According to hospital records, her heart stopped for 6 minutes. But what stood out wasn't the number. It was what she remembered from when she wasn't alive. I called her immediately. Her voice was soft, slow, slightly shaky, but certain. There was no tunnel of light, no angels, but I was in a room full of mirrors. Each mirror was a memory, things I hadn't thought about in years. But they were vivid, like they just happened. I could feel my mother, who had passed away. And the strangest part was, I knew I had a choice, to stay or go back. I asked, "What made you choose to come back?" She gave a faint laugh. "I heard my daughter calling, 'Mommy,' and I just couldn't not return." I sat in silence after the call ended. This wasn't just a sensational story. It was a vivid, emotional testimony from an ordinary American woman. No book deal, no media tour, no need to be believed. Rebecca told me that ever since that experience, she's no longer afraid of dying. "Not because I know what comes next," she said, "but because I felt maybe the end isn't really the end." And that's when I realized I wasn't just chasing strange medical anomalies. I was stepping into a hazy realm between life and death, a place where science and human emotion blur, where maybe life's biggest mystery is still waiting to be understood. And so, I did what any curious, rational American would do when confronted with something beyond explanation. I called the experts. The first was Dr. Michael Crandall, an anesthesiologist and researcher at Johns Hopkins University. I asked him point blank, what is clinical death? And is it really possible for someone to come back after they've already died? He answered in a low, steady voice, the kind you usually hear at medical conferences. Clinical death, by medical definition, is when the heart stops beating, blood ceases to circulate, and oxygen no longer reaches the brain. Under normal conditions, this leads to brain death in about 4 to 6 minutes. However, if CPR is performed quickly, or in certain rare situations like hypothermia, the body can delay actual death for a longer time. I asked, so what about people who wake up after 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even 45 minutes, like in some reported cases? He hesitated. For the first time in our conversation, I could tell he was choosing his words very carefully. We call that the Lazarus phenomenon. It's rare but real. Sometimes, after resuscitation efforts stop, the heart can spontaneously restart. We don't fully understand why. It might have to do with pressure buildup in the chest or ionic shifts in cells. But I leaned closer to the recorder. "But what, doctor?" He exhaled lightly. "Some cases can't be explained. No equipment failure. No drugs involved. They really came back." I hung up with the feeling that I just stepped through a very narrow door. On one side, science offered clear explanations, biological reactions, limitations of medical technology, the complexities of the human body. But on the other side, even the brightest minds had to admit, some things are still beyond our current understanding. And I realized, if I wanted to go deeper, I needed to look beyond just the clinical moment of death. I had to explore what people experienced during that time. I wanted to understand what had happened to Rebecca Nolan, and to the thousands of others who claimed they remembered exactly what occurred after they were clinically dead. So I reached out to one of the leading experts in cognitive neuroscience, Dr. Laura Menendez at the California Institute of Neuroscience. I asked her directly, how can someone whose heart has stopped, whose brain is no longer getting blood, remember anything? Dr. Menendez nodded, as if she'd been expecting the question. Technically, when the heart stops, the brain loses oxygen very quickly. Within 10 to 20 seconds, brainwave activity goes flat. But recent studies suggest that in the first few moments after clinical death, the brain doesn't just shut down as we once thought. In fact, there can be a surge of electrical activity, especially in the cortex, the part of the brain tied to awareness and memory. I leaned back in my chair. You're saying the brain might become more active while it's dying? She smiled gently. Temporarily, yes. We call it a hyper-awareness spike. A brief surge where the brain might rapidly consolidate images, sounds, memories, almost like a fast-forward montage, before complete unconsciousness sets in. I asked, so experiences like moving through a tunnel of light, seeing life flash before your eyes, or meeting deceased loved ones, could just be neurological illusions? Dr. Menendez answered carefully, they could be, but we don't know for sure. Many people describe details they shouldn't have known, things happening outside their body, like conversations between doctors, the cries of loved ones, even the exact layout of the emergency room. I realized I was stepping into a gray zone, where neuroscience collides with spirituality, and where humanity's biggest question lingers. Who am I when my body stops working? Dr. Menendez closed with a sentence I made sure to write down word for word. We know a lot about life, but very little about the moment life leaves the body. That may be the next great frontier for science to conquer. I ended the call and sat in silence for several minutes. I understood then these stories people tell after dying aren't just emotional tales. They have biological grounding, but they also reach beyond what we can currently measure. After my interview with Dr. Menendez, I knew I had to widen the scope. If I wanted to truly understand these post-death experiences, I had to look at large-scale data. Not just individual cases, but thousands of patients across different cultures and countries. That's when I found it. A project called the AWARE study, led by Dr. Sam Parnia, a British-American critical care and resuscitation specialist. The study spanned several years and involved more than 2,000 patients across 15 hospitals in the US, the UK, and Austria. They studied people who had experienced cardiac arrest, clinical death, and were later revived. Out of those, nearly 40% reported having clear, vivid conscious experiences while they were dead. One case from New York gave me chills. A male patient, after being revived, accurately described the layout of the resuscitation room, where the doctors stood, and even the sounds of the medical equipment. Despite his heart not beating for nearly 3 minutes, he said, I felt myself floating above the room, watching my body. I couldn't feel it anymore, but I knew exactly where I was. How can someone without any measurable brain activity observe the world around them? This wasn't some spiritual blog anecdote. This was documented data, cross-checked, peer-reviewed, and verified by clinical research teams using rigorous protocols. I started to realize, this phenomenon can't be dismissed with words like hallucination or delusion. There were just too many similar cases with verifiable details, described by people from different backgrounds, different countries who had never met. In 2022, a study published in Resuscitation showed signs of gamma and alpha brainwaves during cardiac arrest, waves typically associated with higher consciousness and transcendental experiences. Dr. Parnia said during a lecture, we are now facing a question that could change medicine and philosophy as we know it. Is consciousness dependent on the brain? And if not, where does it go when the brain shuts down? I got chills as I read that part. This question is no longer hypothetical. It's being raised right now in some of the top medical centers across the United States. And as an American citizen, I couldn't help but wonder, if science is no longer certain that death is truly the end, then are we, the living, completely misunderstanding the boundary between life and death? It was time to step away from studies on paper and confront what's actually happening. Inside hospitals, morgues, and even funerals, I began investigating cases of coming back to life that defied medical expectations, documented by international media, local police, or medical staff. These were not coincidences that could be brushed off. Case 1, South Africa, 2008. A woman was declared dead after a serious car accident. Her body was taken to the morgue. As staff began to prepare her for post-mortem procedures, they noticed her chest moving. After rechecking, doctors confirmed she was alive, not because of faulty equipment, but because she had been in a prolonged state of clinical death for nearly 6 hours. Case 2, Columbus, Ohio, 2014. A 78-year-old veteran named Walter Williams was declared dead at home. His death certificate had already been signed. But a few hours later, as funeral home workers were preparing the body, he began kicking inside the body bag. His son told CNN, I thought my father was gone. We cried. We prayed. And then he came back. I can't explain it. Case 3, Honduras, 2015. A 16-year-old girl was buried after a sudden heart attack. A day later, relatives heard banging from inside the coffin. They dug her up and found the body still warm, with scratch marks on the inside of the lid. But when they opened it, she was truly gone, this time for real. It was her second death. The incident shocked Central America and raised a disturbing question. How many people have been buried alive, without us ever knowing? I realized that across every continent, within every healthcare system, these cases of coming back continue to emerge as uncontrollable outliers. And no one, not doctors, scientists, or governments, can offer a definitive explanation. Not because they don't want to, but because these events lie outside the boundaries of what modern medicine currently understands. I began asking myself, if sometimes people really can return from death, then what decides who comes back and who doesn't? Is there a limit science hasn't yet reached? Or is there something beyond CPR, a mechanism of the soul, an undiscovered law of nature? One quote echoed in my mind from Carl Jung: "Death may be the greatest transformation we'll never understand." And maybe that's truer now than ever. I'm sitting in a quiet log cabin in Vermont. Snow covers the ground outside. Inside, I'm face to face with David Monroe, age 62. A man who was once declared dead and came back. He gives a soft chuckle when I ask if he's ready to talk. "I've been silent long enough," he says. "If I don't tell this, no one will believe me." David used to be a mechanical engineer, working in aerospace for 30 years. One day in May 2013, while out in his backyard, he suffered a massive stroke. Paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. On the way to the hospital, his heart stopped. "The doctors told my wife I was clinically dead for 6 minutes," David says. But to me, that time felt like hours. When I ask what he remembers from that time, he gazes out the window, thoughtful. "There wasn't a tunnel of light like in the movies," he begins. "I found myself in this completely silent space. Everything felt suspended. No gravity. And in front of me was a kind of curtain, like energy, shimmering. I ask if there was anyone there. No one," he says, "but I could feel a presence. Like a vast consciousness was watching me." David says he had the sense he was being asked, not in words, but as a feeling, "Do you want to stay or go back?" And I don't know why, but I chose to go back. Instantly, he felt himself being pulled back through a spiral. Then everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he was in the ICU. A nurse screamed for a doctor. He had just come back. "My doctor stood silent for a few moments," David recalls. Then he said, "I've never seen anything like this. We lost you." Medically, David's recovery was attributed to CPR and electric shocks. But the duration his heart was stopped exceeded the safe threshold. He had no brain damage, no memory loss, and he had a vivid recollection of something that didn't belong to this world. I shared David's story with a neurologist at Boston University. He simply nodded. "We call that a near-death experience, NDE, he said. "But that doesn't mean we understand it." I left Vermont with a strange feeling. David wasn't trying to convince me. He hadn't made a video, hadn't written a book. He just wanted to tell the truth, as he experienced it. And maybe it was that calm honesty that made me believe him. After Vermont, I spent nearly a week poring through medical records, reading first-hand accounts, and interviewing people over Zoom who had experienced clinical death. I wanted to know, was David's story just a rare fluke, or was there a deeper pattern here that science has yet to explain? The answer gave me chills. Yes, and not just one. I read the case file of Pam Reynolds, a patient from Atlanta who was declared clinically dead during brain surgery in 1991. She was under deep anesthesia, her blood drained from her brain, and her body cooled to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, a state in which, theoretically, no conscious awareness could exist. And yet, afterward, she described in striking detail the surgical instruments used, the words spoken by the doctors, and even visual elements inside the operating room. During a time when both her heart and brain monitors had flatlined, I spoke with a former firefighter named Rodney in Arizona. He had been electrocuted while rescuing a family from a house fire. His heart stopped for nearly 4 minutes. When he came to, he described the sensation of being pulled through a current of blue energy, then standing in a wide open field filled with white light, not blinding, but warm and full of unconditional love. Another story came from a woman named Elena in Texas, who said she saw her entire life replay before her eyes. Every small moment, like a slow-motion film. But there was no judgment, only a deep understanding of the consequences her actions had caused. After compiling over 20 first-hand near-death accounts, I noticed a startling pattern, details that repeated again and again, even among people from vastly different backgrounds, regions, and religious beliefs. A sensation of leaving the body and observing oneself from the outside, entering a void or space where time no longer existed, a feeling deeply connected to a vast, indescribable consciousness, a being offered a decision or a moment of choice to return or stay, a complete absence of fear about death upon waking. Many even said they didn't want to return, but somehow knew they had to. I sent these findings to Dr. Bruce Grayson, a clinical psychologist at the University of Virginia, who has studied near-death experiences, NDEs, for over 40 years. He replied, "Science can measure brain activity, heart rate, hormones, but we don't yet have tools to measure consciousness that exists beyond the material. It's possible that these experiences aren't generated by the brain, but come from something else." I found similar reports from Japan, Iran, Brazil, even deep in the Amazon, where people with no exposure to the internet or Western culture described almost identical experiences. That made me ask myself, if such surreal experiences are happening all over the world, across so many cultures, could we be staring at something universal, something science simply hasn't named yet? As I finished this part of my journey, I wondered, if those who have died all describe the same thing, is death truly the end? Or is it just a doorway, and we've only peered through the very first crack? I've heard strange stories, uncannily consistent testimonies, and a part of me wants to believe there's something beyond what humanity currently understands. But growing up American, raised in a system that champions critical thinking, I also know belief is not a substitute for evidence. And evidence, that's always the first demand of science. So, I began to step into the realm of skepticism. I reached out to Dr. Stephen Novella, a neurologist at Yale University School of Medicine. When I shared the details of near-death phenomena, he raised an eyebrow and responded calmly. "We're not denying the patient's experience, but the brain is an extraordinary organ. Under extreme stress, lack of oxygen, or during resuscitation, it can produce incredibly vivid hallucinations." I asked, "But how can they recount specific details of what happened in the operating room, when the monitors show no signs of consciousness?" He replied, "Consciousness isn't an on-off switch. There may still be low-level awareness that current machines can't detect. And memory, it can be reconstructed after the fact." A common argument among skeptical scientists is that all near-death experiences can be explained by brain function. Some studies in mice have shown gamma waves, brain waves associated with cognition, spike right after the heart stops. Dr. Kevin Nelson, a sleep disorder specialist at the University of Kentucky, suggested many near-death experiences resemble lucid dreaming or sleep paralysis, states where the brain creates vivid illusions due to a breakdown between consciousness and physical control. One major reason for scientific caution is this: near-death experiences cannot be measured, repeated, or objectively verified, the gold standard of scientific research. I asked Dr. Susan Blackmore, a renowned psychologist in the UK, what if someday technology allows us to record consciousness independent of the brain? She laughed and said, "If that day comes, it would rewrite the foundations of modern science. But as of now, we haven't seen any evidence strong enough to force a shift in the assumption that consciousness is a product of the brain." Despite skepticism, many scientists remain open to the idea that there's still something we haven't yet understood. They don't outright reject the phenomenon, they're simply asking for more data. Some institutions, like the Division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, at the University of Virginia, are seriously studying near-death experiences, not as superstition, but as a real mind-body phenomenon of unknown origin. Listening to both sides, I realized Science isn't the enemy of mystery. It's simply a tool, one that seeks truth, even when it hasn't yet found the full answer. Maybe these returns from death aren't telling us about the afterlife, but rather about a deeper world, one that exists within us all. I used to think stories about people waking up in coffins were just urban legends, something out of B-grade horror films. But as it turns out, those events have actually happened even in the modern world, reported in mainstream newspapers and on national TV. And once you hear what I'm about to share, you might never look at a coffin the same way again. In February 2014, in the city of Lexington, Mississippi, 78-year-old Walter Williams was declared dead. Paramedics confirmed there was no pulse, no heartbeat. His body was sent to a funeral home, and the family began making arrangements for the burial. But just as the funeral staff began preparing the body bag started moving. Walter was still alive. He was rushed back to the hospital and lived for several more days before passing away for real. Health officials called it a miracle, and the local community was stunned and deeply unsettled. In South Africa, a man in his 50s woke up 26 hours after being declared dead from a severe asthma attack. His body had been stored in a local morgue freezer. One of the workers confirmed. He screamed from inside. We all ran. We thought it was a ghost. Upon reevaluation, doctors concluded that he had fallen into a deep coma with an extremely faint heartbeat, too faint for the machines to detect. In the medical world, there's a term for this, the Lazarus syndrome, a rare phenomenon where the heart starts beating again spontaneously after cardiac arrest and failed resuscitation. The name comes from Lazarus, the biblical figure whom Jesus raised from the dead. There have been over 30 documented cases, though the real number may be higher, since the phenomenon is incredibly rare and tends to happen in emergency settings. One particularly chilling case happened in 2014 in the Philippines. A 3-year-old girl was declared dead after days of high fever. The family held a funeral service, and her body was placed in a coffin. But in the middle of the service, she suddenly sat up, leaving everyone in the room horrified. A video capturing the moment went viral across the globe, sparking a wave of unsettling questions. Can we really misdiagnose death that easily? Before starting this journey, I was skeptical of people who believed in life after death. But now I've started to question the opposite. What if we're declaring people dead too soon? How many have been buried alive without anyone knowing? It's a terrifying thought. Sometimes, the things we think only happen in horror movies end up being the 6 o'clock news. A friend said that to me, and ever since, I haven't dared open my kid's toy coffin again. I used to think death was a clear-cut moment, like flipping a switch, but every doctor I've spoken to has shaken their head. One of them, Dr. Anthony Keller, an intensive care specialist in New York, told me bluntly, death isn't like a switch. It's more like a building losing power, floor by floor. Sometimes the first floor might just come back online. That line gave me chills. Medically speaking, clinical death occurs when the heart stops beating, breathing ceases, and there's no circulation in the body. But that doesn't necessarily mean biological death. The point when brain cells begin to irreversibly break down. The window between those two states is about 4 to 6 minutes, known as the golden time for resuscitation. And sometimes, with modern life-saving technologies like CPR, defibrillators, or ECMO, extracorporeal circulation, doctors can bring someone back from beyond the threshold of death. A recent study from the University of Michigan showed that when the heart stops, the brain doesn't shut down instantly. In the first few seconds, it may actually surge in activity, almost like it's sending out one final SOS. Researchers detected gamma waves, brain waves associated with awareness and consciousness, spiking at that moment. One scientist commented, "It's as if the brain is trying to make sense of what's happening. Or maybe it's reliving the entire life." There have been recorded cases where patients came back with a heartbeat 10 to 15 minutes after all resuscitation efforts had been stopped. This is what's known as Lazarus syndrome, rare, but real. Theories include, a pressure from chest compressions during CPR temporarily prevents blood flow, which then restarts naturally once the pressure is released. Adrenaline builds up in body tissues and kicks in late, triggering a delayed reaction. I asked Dr. Keller, "When is someone truly dead?" He paused, then said quietly, "We only know when we can't bring them back. But is that death? Or just the limit of medicine at that moment?" I didn't know how to respond. Whether or not you believe in souls or life after death, what's happening in emergency rooms, in morgues, and in neuroscience labs shows us one thing. Death is anything but simple. It's a journey, not a full stop. Between the edges of life and death is where science and miracles shake hands. I wrote that down in my notebook as I left the hospital. Have you ever imagined waking up inside a coffin? The sound of dirt and gravel raining down from above. The air thinning, limbs frozen in panic. No one hears the screams for help. That's not a scene from a horror movie. It's something that has happened more often than you might think. Before the rise of modern science, determining whether someone was truly dead was subjective. No heart monitors, no EKGs. People relied on signs like pale skin, cold limbs, and the absence of breath. But as you've already learned, clinical death is not the same as biological death. There was a time in both the United States and Europe when people were obsessed with the fear of being buried alive. 1896 survey in New York revealed 1 in every 25 people interviewed feared not death itself, but being buried alive. Real cases that actually happened. 1. Angelica Acevedo, Honduras, 2015. A 16-year-old girl was declared dead due to a high fever. The family held a funeral and buried her in a coffin. But a day later, people heard noises coming from inside the grave. When they opened it, her fingernails were scratched, and her body was still warm. Doctors later suspected catalepsy, a rare neurological condition causing the body to go completely still, with almost no visible signs of life. 2. Octavia Smith Hatcher, Kentucky, 1891. After dying suddenly from an unknown illness, Octavia was buried following standard traditions. But soon after, others in town developed similar symptoms, yet recovered. Her family became suspicious. When her grave was exhumed, her body was found turned to one side, with a distorted face twisted in terror. The event became an enduring Southern legend for decades. Safety coffins, born from fear. During the 18th and 19th centuries, inventors came up with bizarre, ingenious devices to prevent premature burial. Death bells, a string tied to the hand of the deceased, leading to a bell above ground. If the person moved even slightly, the bell would ring. A coffin breathing tubes, metal pipes that channeled air from above ground into the coffin. A viewing windows, installed on coffin lids to check for changes in skin color or signs of life. It may sound crazy now, but back then, it was the ultimate insurance policy. Warning: the psychological fallout. It's not just a fear you carry while alive. Those who were once declared dead, then came back, often find themselves fighting social doubt, even legal battles. One man in Ohio had his request for new ID documents denied because, according to official records, he'd been dead for 7 years. He lost his job, his social security card, and had to go to court just to prove he was still alive. Speech balloon, and what if it happened to you? That question haunted me throughout my investigation. We all trust the process, we trust doctors and death certificates. But what if one day, you woke up in the middle of the night, in pitch darkness, your limbs bound, and no one could hear your voice? I'm not sure I'd stay sane. The dead never speak, but sometimes they knock. An old Scottish proverb I once found in a library. When I first started collecting stories of the dead coming back, I thought they were just medical errors, flukes, or urban myths. But then a neurologist in Boston told me, death isn't a moment, it's a process. And sometimes that process gets reversed. That line opened a new maze, a space where the lines between science, consciousness, and the afterlife blur more than ever before. Brain 1. The scientific explanations. Delayed death phenomenon. Some patients have been declared clinically dead for minutes or even hours, only to wake up later without brain damage. This is often attributed to spontaneous hypothermia, which slows cellular death. B. Brain cells still active after cardiac arrest. A 2017 study from Western Ontario University found electrical brain activity may persist up to 10 minutes after clinical death, which suggests consciousness could linger, if only briefly, after the body has shut down. C. The gray zone of death. Doctors refer to this as the in-between state, where a person isn't fully alive, but not truly dead. They're in a razor-thin window where, with just the right intervention, they can be brought back. Crystal Ball 2. Spiritual and religious interpretations. Memories of the other side. Many report seeing white light, deceased loved ones, or feeling like they were floating above their own bodies during death. Researchers call this the near-death experience, NDE. An estimated 10 to 20% of clinically dead patients report having had one. B. The soul hasn't yet left the body. Some belief systems suggest the soul takes time to fully separate from the body. If called back by strong emotion, prayer, or unfinished business, it can return at least temporarily. C. Supernatural intervention. Some believe in guardian angels or divine missions not yet completed. Stories of miraculous survival often tie back to this kind of faith. Test tube 3. Science still isn't enough. Despite hundreds of studies on NDEs, clinical death, and miraculous recoveries, no single explanation fits all cases. And part of that is because, how do you measure something that happens after life? Many doctors, scientists, even astronauts like Edgar Mitchell, who once walked on the moon, have admitted, we know far too little about consciousness, and death might be the key. Exploding Head 4. What if the dead could come back? This isn't just a hypothetical question anymore. A California-based company, BioQuark, once claimed to be developing a method to stimulate brain cells in clinically dead patients in order to restore consciousness. The results haven't been officially published yet, but just the idea sent chills down my spine. If one day, death is no longer the final chapter, then laws, insurance policies, religion, ethics, everything will have to be rewritten from scratch. Death is no longer a certainty. It's just one phase of a cycle that we don't fully understand. Dr. Sam Parnia, NYU Langone Health, who has studied hundreds of after-death return cases. I never thought I'd end up in a small town in Georgia, listening to a man recount how he woke up inside a morgue bag. But that's exactly what brought me here. To a quiet, rustic home in the suburbs, face to face with Raymond Keller, 62, a retired firefighter, officially declared dead, who came back to life. Receipt, undeniable paperwork. Raymond showed me his hospital records. Right there it said, time of death, 3:47 a.m., cause cardiac arrest. His wife told me the doctors had performed CPR for nearly 30 minutes. No response, no pulse, no brain activity. He was sent straight to the hospital morgue. Ice Cube, I woke up in the dark. Everything was freezing. Raymond spoke in a slow, deep voice. It felt like a ton of bricks was crushing me. I couldn't move. The air smelled like plastic and chemicals. Then, I heard myself breathing. I thought I was dreaming, until I kicked the bag open. The morgue attendant fainted when Raymond walked out of the cold chamber. Thought balloon, what did he remember before dying? Raymond said he saw himself floating above the ER room, watching doctors trying to resuscitate him. Then he saw a long hallway filled with soft light and a whisper. Not yet. That was it. No angels, no God, no hell, but a deep, indescribable peace, he emphasized. Brain life after coming back. You'd think it was a miracle, but reality wasn't so kind. Raymond lost his job, suffered mild neurological damage, and sank into deep depression because no one believed him. He had to undergo therapy for PTSD. No one teaches you what to do after you've died and come back, he said with a sad smile. Test tube, what did the doctors say? I reached out to Dr. Amanda Liu, the attending physician who had signed his death certificate. She told me, I don't understand it. We followed every protocol. Nobody wanted this to happen, but I won't deny it. Sometimes, death may not be the end. Puzzle piece, a new faith. Raymond now spends most of his time writing, speaking to heart patient support groups, and just slowing down. I don't know what kept me here, but I'm here. And I'm not wasting this second chance. Meeting Raymond changed how I see death. It's no longer a straight line. It's more like a spiral, a door that may close temporarily, but not always forever. Brazil. A body sits up in the middle of a funeral. In 2012, 54-year-old Valdelucio de Oliveira was declared dead due to respiratory cancer and taken to the morgue at Menandro de Faria Hospital. His family held a funeral, but then, during the viewing, he knocked on the coffin lid. People fled in panic. Doctors later confirmed his heartbeat and breath were so faint, standard equipment failed to detect them. Senegal. Girl awakens after 3 days in a grave. In 2015, a 12-year-old girl was buried in a rural village. 3 days later, strange sounds were heard from her grave. When exhumed, she was alive, severely dehydrated but conscious. While many blamed misdiagnosis and premature burial, some locals believed a spiritual force was at work. India. Dead for 20 minutes. Returns with visions. Dr. Rajesh Kumar, a well-known physician in New Delhi, experienced 20 minutes of clinical death after a car accident. When revived, he described otherworldly visions, a place beyond time, where he heard voices in a language he'd never known. His book about the experience, The Silence Between Breaths, became a bestseller in India and sparked debate in the medical and scientific communities. United States, USA, resurrection caught on hospital camera. In Ohio, 2018, Jennifer Parson, 36, was declared clinically dead after a stroke. For 27 minutes, no heartbeat, no breathing. As the nurse was preparing to cover her with a sheet, her heart started beating again. Surveillance footage captured the entire moment. Doctors called it an inexplicable resurrection. Jennifer later said, "I don't remember anything, but I felt like I'd gone very far, and someone pushed me back." Bar chart numbers that make you think. A 2014 study conducted by the University of Southampton in the UK, involving over 2,000 cardiac arrest patients across 15 hospitals, revealed some startling findings. 39% of those who were revived reported having awareness after being declared clinically dead. Some recalled vivid details from the ER, conversations between doctors, specific movements, despite showing no detectable brain activity at the time. So what does science say? Researchers have proposed several theories. The brain may continue functioning for a few minutes after the heart stops. And near-death experiences might result from chaotic brain activity, like one final dream before the brain fully shuts down. However, in many cases, where the heart stops for extended periods and then starts again, the phenomenon remains well beyond our current understanding. I'm starting to realize these resurrections aren't just fodder for tabloids or Hollywood thrillers. They challenge our core definitions of life and death. And if death isn't a hard stop, maybe we still know very little about that final moment. After diving into stories of people who died and came back, I decided to return to science, not to find a definitive answer, but to discover where the limits of science might lie. Especially in neuroscience, the field we believe holds the key to life and consciousness. Brain is life stored in the brain, or somewhere even deeper. I met with Dr. Eleanor Michaels, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins. I asked her, half expecting a skeptical laugh, "Is coming back from the dead actually possible?" Her answer wasn't what I expected. We still don't have a precise definition of death. Medically, we use metrics, no heartbeat, no brain activity, but if machines alone determine life, then sometimes machines can be wrong. Chart decreasing, can the brain be temporarily dead? Some studies suggest the brain may retain microscopic activity for minutes, sometimes even tens of minutes, after the heart stops. A 2018 study by NYU recorded brain waves 3 to 5 minutes after clinical death was declared. And those waves closely resembled the brain activity of vivid dreaming. This has led many researchers to ask, could near-death experiences, seeing tunnels, bright lights, deceased loved ones, simply be the brain's final burst of perception before full shutdown? Test tube, but what about actual resurrections? I asked the hard question, if the brain has flatlined and the heart has stopped, how can a body restart itself? Dr. Michaels admitted, "It's extremely rare. We don't yet have the tools to track the full biochemical shutdown. And sometimes, there might be random moments when bioelectric activity spontaneously reboots, like a computer powering back on after a shutdown." Then she paused and added, "But there are cases that go beyond our current hypotheses. People coming back after 30 minutes, an hour, with memory intact. We're forced to admit there are limits to what science understands right now. Can consciousness exist outside the body? Some bold new theories in neuroscience suggest that consciousness may not be entirely dependent on the brain's physical structure. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and physicist Roger Penrose proposed the orchestrated objective reduction, orchestroar theory, claiming that consciousness is a form of quantum energy that exists independently within neural microstructures. According to this theory, when a person dies, consciousness energy isn't lost. It's released from the body, and under certain conditions, it could potentially return. Exploding head sounds insane? Maybe, but I'm not saying these theories are fact. But they've been seriously discussed at international scientific conferences. And the surprising part? Even some of the most grounded neuroscientists are starting to question the very foundation of their field. If science, this thing we hold as absolute, still contains blank spaces, then maybe someone dying and coming back isn't so impossible after all. After hearing spine-chilling stories and head-spinning theories, I reminded myself to keep my feet on the ground. Because for every mystery, there's also plenty of deception and deadly mistakes. Man-zombie, resurrected, or just never dead. One of the most shocking incidents was that of Josefina Martinez in New Jersey, declared dead at home in 2019. Her family began funeral preparations, and her body was taken to the morgue. But 3 hours later, when a staff member came to check one last time, she moved a finger. Sounds like a horror story, right? But doctors later said she had a rare condition called Lazarus syndrome, where the heart spontaneously restarts minutes after death, for reasons still unknown. In other cases, though, the cause isn't supernatural. A faulty heart monitor, a rush doctor, or a patient in a coma that mimicked death. Receipt controversial cases. I looked into another famous incident, Fatima Rodriguez from Florida, whose family claimed she came back to life after dying in the hospital. A video went viral with millions of views. But after investigation, police found the video had been edited, and the death certificate was forged. Why? For attention, maybe even to collect donations. I spoke with a forensic specialist in Miami, and he didn't hold back. Some people will fabricate stories just for views or publicity. That kind of behavior seriously undermines the cases that actually deserve investigation. Man detective, the thin line between mystery and manipulation. The truth is, some of these stories may involve genuine medical phenomena we haven't explained yet, but others clearly exploit the public's wonder and belief for personal gain. Like the case in Texas, where a pastor claimed to have resurrected a woman through prayer. Upon investigation, it turned out she was never dead, just in a deep, oxygen-deprived sleep following a seizure. Light bulb, a lesson for truth seekers. As an American, as someone who values truth and believes in science, I have to admit, fascination with the mysterious can never replace the need to verify facts. Not every back from the dead story is true, but not all of them are fake either. The challenge is having the tools, the time, and the clarity to tell the difference between what's truly unexplained and what's just a clever hoax. After weeks of digging through research, interviewing doctors, scientists, priests, eyewitnesses, and even people who say they've returned from the dead, I can only say one thing: this world is far more complex than we think. Brain science still doesn't have all the answers. Clinical death, according to modern medicine, means vital functions like heartbeat, breathing, and brain activity have stopped for a certain amount of time. But whether the brain shuts off completely or simply goes into a brief hibernation is still being studied. I once asked a neurologist in Boston, if someone wakes up after 10 minutes of cardiac arrest, is that a miracle or science? He smiled and replied, maybe it's both, or maybe just one. The truth is, we still don't know for sure. Red heart, something beyond numbers. Beyond the medical discussions, what moved me most were the stories of spiritual transformation. Many people who came back from the brink of death went on to completely change their lives, becoming more loving, more compassionate, more purposeful. A veteran from California told me that after being revived following 6 minutes of cardiac arrest, he gave up drinking, reunited with his family, and began helping the homeless. "I don't know if I saw heaven or just had a vivid dream," he said, "but I know I was given another chance, and I'm not wasting it." Balance scale. So, what should we believe? There's no simple answer. As an American, someone raised to believe in freedom, in science, and also in hope, I believe. Believing in miracles is part of what makes us human. But recognizing what's real requires reason, evidence, and humility. Not every resurrection story is true. But if even one of them is, if even one person truly crossed the line between life and death and returned, then maybe we need to rewrite our definition of death. Folded hands, a final message to you watching this video. If you've lost someone you love, or if you're facing illness or fear, please know this: your story isn't over. Science is evolving every day, and sometimes hope comes from the most unexpected places. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. And don't forget to leave a comment. What do you think about people coming back from the dead? A hoax? A miracle? Or a reminder that there's still so much we don't understand about life itself?